Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so then we can start. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining the fourth day of the Cambodia Waste Summit 2020. Thank you very much to our special guests from the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and from the GIZ for joining this session. My name is Aurora Rios from BlackForest Solutions. I'll be moderating the session today. The topic will be focused on EPR. Before we start, I would like to kindly ask you to observe some guidelines so that it can be an enjoyable session for all participants. The first is, if you haven't already, please pause your video sharing so that we can make sure that everybody can see the speaker at the best possible quality and his presentation as well. The second is, on that line, kindly mute your microphone so that we can avoid any background noises and can hear with the best quality the content of the presentations. Please be informed that this session is being recorded, and you also have the opportunity to take note of the contact information of the organizers and of the speakers, as it will be shown throughout the PowerPoint presentation. Last but not least, kindly use the chat function if you have any comments or questions. We will be observing this at all times. And at the end of each presentation and at the end of the whole block, we will have a session to address this pool and lead a discussion. That said, before we continue, I would like to leave the floor to Dr. Untied.
Yes, thank you, Aurora, and sorry for the technical issues or problems I had at the beginning. On behalf of GIZ and the German Business Group, I would very much like to welcome you to the second session of our European Circular Economy Business Panel and Matchmaking event. My name is Bianca Untied, and on behalf of German Development Corporation, I'm currently working at the German Business Group in Cambodia, which is one of the founding members of the European Chamber. I would very much thank the main organizers of the Waste Summit, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and CONPET, for giving us this opportunity to organize this panel and matchmaking event, and a special thanks to BlackForest Solutions. They really managed to attract a lot of companies from Germany and other European companies. So that means that you all are very interested in the Cambodian market. And those who followed the other discussions yesterday or on Monday, they know that the involvement of the private sector is key once we are talking about waste management problems in Cambodia. Maybe you can switch to the next slide, please.
Just a moment.
Okay, thank you. So we've organized this panel as part of the Waste Summit because you all know that the amount of untreated waste in Cambodia is very high, therefore the Waste Summit. And at the same time, Germany is one of the market leaders when it comes to waste management technologies, recycling technologies. Actually, the circular economy is one of the priority issues when we're talking about environmental policies in Germany, and we've learned in the last days that waste management has evolved to a very powerful and large economic sector in Germany. We all know that Germany and Cambodia, they are not the framework conditions differ quite a lot, but still we think that the solutions and technologies provided by the different speakers could also be transferred to Cambodia, at least partly. So therefore, we've organized this panel and invited several speakers from German market-leading companies, but also from other European countries, social entrepreneurs and startups, to present their technologies and services in different areas of waste management. And last but not least, I would like to mention that the German Development Corporation also supports waste management solutions in Cambodia. So GIZ, for instance, will start with 2 new programs tackling the problem of single-use plastic and the untreated disposal in the landscape. And furthermore, quite generally speaking, German Development Corporation provides specific support programs to the private sector that are interested in pilot projects. So if you as a private company, for instance, are interested in setting up a pilot project in Cambodian waste management, it could be supported either technically or financially. This panel is meant as an ideas generator, actually. We would like to find out whether some of these solutions could be applied in Cambodia as well, and it should serve as a matchmaking platform between Cambodian stakeholders and private companies from Germany and other European companies. Maybe you can go to the next slide. As mentioned, today is the second session of this panel. Yesterday we talked about waste separation. Today we will focus on the extended producer responsibility system approach that was mentioned during the UNDP session yesterday as well, but we would like to provide a deep dive and somehow showcase examples how this policy approach might be transferred to Cambodia as well. The second session this afternoon will focus on the aspects of hazardous waste and how it can be treated. And tomorrow afternoon, we will have two more sessions, one focusing on waste separation again and collection, and the last one on digital tools, how the informal sector, for instance, could be integrated in circular economy approaches, and how to create awareness amongst the Cambodian society. So as mentioned, it should serve all the sessions should serve as an ideas generator. I hope that we will create several ideas, or that you will get some insights on the different topics. And as mentioned, it should serve as a matchmaking between Cambodian stakeholders and German and other European private companies. So I hope we'll have interesting discussions today and tomorrow. And I would like to hand over now to BlackForest Solutions again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Dr. Untied. I think the participants now know very well what our focus is and where we're heading to. That said, we could now begin with the first guest. Our first speaker is Mr. Christophe Pautrat, who is the Head of Global Partnerships and Operations Development of the Landbell Group. The topic of today is what is the impact of the implementation of EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility Systems. Mr. Pautrat, thank you very much for joining. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Aurora. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to go through a brief presentation to introduce the concept of EPR. So if you can go to the next slide, please, just a couple of words on the Landbell. Next slide, please. So we are a German-based group. We have presence mostly in the EMEA region, but we cover globally in terms of the services we deliver. And basically, we have three business lines. We run a producer responsibility organization. We have about 32 of those to manage take back of batteries, on waste packaging on behalf of producers. We also provide consultancy services and compliance in relation with EPR and environmental and chemical regulations. And we develop specific software to manage reverse chain circular economy. So if you can go to the next slide. And so the question, I think, before we can have a chat with the various participants is what is EPR? And I want to make sure that everybody is aligned onto the concept of EPR. If you can move to the next. And the EPR was actually coined as a concept by a Swedish professor from the Lund University, Dr. Lundqvist, who said, okay, in order to encourage producers to manufacture environmentally satisfactory product, we need to make them responsible for the entire life cycle of the product. So in other terms, if they're also responsible for the end of life, then they should be incentivized to create product that cost less and have less impact on the end of life. Next. So this concept was further developed and refined by the OECD, and we're talking about early 90s there. And it was defined under the following definition. So you have, first of all, you shift to the producer the responsibility for end-of-life management, which means that it's not going to be a cost for municipalities, it's not going to be a cost for the public, it's going to be the responsibility of the producers to pay for and potentially arrange the removal from the market of end-of-life products and deal with them in an environmentally satisfactory manner. And in addition, there is embedded into this EPR concept the notion of providing incentives to producers so that they will better design their product. Because if they have to pay for the removal of the product, it costs money. If you want to reduce the cost, then maybe you can, for instance, design a product that is fully recyclable. Next slide, please. So in summary, EPR is you shift the cost from public and municipal to producers. So there is no cost for municipalities and there is no cost for producers. And producers have to finance collection, sorting, and recycling of the waste, and potentially favoring the reuse of the product, because this is also a direction of EPR. Next, please. So there are additional benefits to EPR. And it, of course, depends how you define, how you implement the EPR in any given country for any type of product. But basically, the side aspect, beside the shifting the cost, of course, is to potentially through green design, design for environment, and recycling of the end-of-life product, is not to tap into virgin material, is to design products which also maybe are going to consume less energy to be produced and to be utilized. And overall, there is a lesser impact of the product on the environment. Next, please. So EPR it started out in Europe about 30 years ago with the first instance of actual EPR implementation in Germany on packaging. But since then, it has developed quite steadily globally across all the regions of the world. And as we speak, there are over 400 different EPR systems across the globe. Next one. So typically EPR is used for packaging, for electronic waste, for waste battery, and for end-of-life vehicles. But we see that in some countries, additional EPR concepts are developed for other products like paper, furniture, end-of-life tires, etc. And for instance, in Europe, in the coming years, EPR is going to be implementing for fishing gears, like fishing nets, etc., which are a major contribution on some shores to marine pollution. So it's a very universal way of tackling the end of life of products. Next, please. Okay, next. So there are two ways basically to arrange EPR. The first way, which is the most intuitively logical, is to tell a producer you take care of your own waste. It's called individual producer responsibility. And if I place, I don't know, beverages on the market, then I am expected to collect the bottle. It's easier said than done, because if I sell my product to many different consumers, if I want to collect and after that the waste, is going to be extremely costly and not effective from the logistic point of view. So there is a next model, which is the collective system, where producers actually team up together in order to arrange collectively the take back and the financing of the take back of end-of-life product. So this is the one that we see more often than not implemented. Next, please. So in order to do this collective implementation, the typical vehicle is a PRO, or the Producer Responsibility Organization. It has many names. Sometimes it is called in North America Stewardship Organization. In Europe, it's very often described as a compliance scheme or a producer compliance scheme. It's an entity which is going to act on behalf of the producers in order to organize and finance the take back of waste. So it's a service provider which may or may not be created and controlled by producer, but which is operating on behalf of the producers to perform the responsibilities that they have under the EPR. And very often in countries where there are regulations for EPR, it's mandatory to join the PRO. Not always, but sometimes often. And for a simple type of waste like packaging or e-waste, sometimes you can have also in the same countries multiple PROs in competition to provide the same service. Next, please. Okay, you can skip to next. Okay, so if you want to implement EPR, you need to ask yourself a number of questions. And the main one is, what do you want to achieve? And of course, you can have various motivation and different drivers to create EPR. Maybe the only thing you want to do is to remove a cost burden from municipalities and shift it to producers. But maybe you also want to avoid littering, or maybe you want to favor the recycling of product, or maybe you want to create a source of recycled material to be reintroduced into production. And it could be a combination, but of course, depending on the objective you pursue, then you need to define, you need to draft your EPR systems so that it can achieve the higher goals that you set for yourself. Next, please. So a key determinant for EPR is also how you include the stakeholders on who are they. Because when you look at end-of-life product, basically it is addressing all society. Of course, they are the producers and they are the consumers, but you need to take into account the retailers who are distributing the product, the municipalities who usually very often are in charge of waste management. You need to look into the waste managers, the recyclers, maybe the NGOs who are dealing with consumer education in relation to environment and so forth and so on. And each of those stakeholders have a role to play in an EPR scheme. And if you want a successful EPR scheme, you need to clarify to each of those stakeholders what role they have in contributing to achieving the target. And usually, in order to achieve that, the best way to do it is to pass regulations, and that those regulations would be detailed enough so that you set the target, you set the responsibility, and you set the enforcement and penalty rules so that you avoid cheat and you avoid free riders, so that producers participating into the system can participate in a fair manner on a level playing field, and that you don't have some producers who benefit from the system while not contributing financially to it. Next, please. So the typical stakeholders, as I said, so you have producers, and they could be local producer, manufacturer, they could be importers. You have the authorities at national level or local level, whether it is the political arm or it is the administrative and arm. You have all the waste managers, including the informal sector, who very often in many countries is involved in the collection of waste and sometimes also in the sorting of waste and pre-processing. And then society at large, from educational institution to consumer and NGO. Next, please. So a very important way also to control and measure the achievement of an EPR system is to have a solid data management system in place, because you want to know what is entering the market. if only to know what you need to collect afterward, but also to measure the respective obligation of the producers, because typically they should be responsible for their share of what they place in the market. Also measure the performance of the operation in terms of collection and recycling. And of course, you need to manage the cost of the entire EPR system. So data management and digitalization is a key for efficiency, for control, and for enforcement. Next, please. Okay, so yeah, I won't describe that too much, but typically, if you look at the data flow, one way also to consolidate all the information is to use a so-called registry. And the registry, it can be an entity, it can be a system, it can be an entity using a system, but the key factor is that both producers and PROs, and sometimes also waste managers directly, are going to report into the registry the data of what is placed on the market, what is removed from the market, what are the achievements in terms of collection and treatment and recycling, and so that there is a visibility on the performance, there is a visibility on who contributes and who doesn't, and it creates a full control tower of the EPR system. And this registry system can be managed by the PRO, it can be managed by a group of PRO, it can be managed by the Environment Agency. It doesn't matter, but the function is key to ensure actual traceability of the data and of the result. Next, please. Okay, so just to summarize the steps for implementing EPR. So setting targets, identify and involving the stakeholders, understanding the specific of the country and the market on which the EPR will be implemented, defining the targets, the timelines, the role and responsibilities, translating that into a legal framework at the levels that are necessary depending on the country's legal system. And then, of course, after that, move to practical implementation, for instance, through creation of a PRO, creation of the registry, starting operation, and having a continuous measurement, continuous improvement, and continuous enforcement of the regulation. And I would like to finish, if you go to the next slide, really with the key success factors for EPR through our experience. I mean, after having implemented over 30 different EPR systems in multiple countries and for multiple waste streams. First of all, you need smart targets, that is targets that are realistic, ambitious, but achievable. You need to clearly define role and responsibility of everyone. You need to ensure level playing field to avoid profiteering for some actors, producers or waste managers. You need to empower and educate consumers through education campaign, clear explanations about what to do and why to do it. Set rules that are simple so that they can be understood and implemented, and equitable, again, to avoid profiteering. Having a clear enforcement of the regulation through control, audit, and penalty systems. And of course, finally, promote research and development, because through this research and development, you can improve recycling, you can improve design for environment, and reinjection of recycled material into the design of products. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much too, Christophe. This is very, very interesting. And as was stated before, even though the conditions in Europe and in Cambodia are very different, the concept of having producers, stakeholders, and players is the same everywhere. And with these, with the summary and aspects to observe, we do have a much better understanding on what the steps would look like. Somebody were to start. Thank you very, very much again. I have looked at the chat and I don't see any questions at the moment. So if that is the case, we can introduce, or I would like to introduce our next speaker, who is Mr. Marc Bouillon. Mr. Jean-Marc has over 30 years experience in the production and technical field in one of the largest bottling companies in the world, and he will focus his presentation on EPR, but from the producer's perspective, of course. Thank you very much for joining us, Jean-Marc. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Aurora. So good morning, hello, good afternoon to all. My presentation is really taking the producer side, and I will start, in fact, with the producer as a manufacturer, and it's why I am showing as the key in this presentation the factory. And perhaps next, please. Yes, so it's clear that EPR has deep effects on the businesses of the producers. Okay, and as Christophe explained, producers are really at the heart of EPR dynamics. Next, please. So about my past, and I think I am sharing it now because it's really about hands-on experience, and in the water bottling industry, EPR has been a key topic over the last 30 years. When I started in the early 90s, EPR was really already a boiling topic, and there has been a lot of development over years on EPR in the water bottling industry. Now it's very important, and I think knowledge is very key to ensure that EPR is going to deliver what I will say it will deliver. Okay. And at this stage, I am doing research to contribute to knowledge building. And EPR, I will share with you, I will focus on water, I will focus on bottle, and I will focus also on behaviors, which are key to EPR. And the key point, it's really the emergence of a circular economy, I will say, for packaging, and I will say now in practice. So next, please. The first message I would like to share with you is really there is no one-size-fits-all solution. And that's, I would say, that's at all levels. Each industry has specificities, and when you start to speak about EPR, you need and you must be specific. You must consider a grounded practice. So, as an example, if we speak about packaging industry, there are a lot of different ways of developing packaging products, packaging operation, and then if you start to sort out, for example, glass as a packaging versus plastic as a packaging, okay, then EPR for glass is not the same grounded practice than EPR for plastic. And then if you dig into EPR for plastic, the kind of plastic you are going to deal with is very key. So for example, if you deal with polyethylene or PET, it's not it's not the same. And so you really have to be specific in the flow you consider. So next, please. So to keep it very simple and to focus on what matters, a producer produces a product. So it is why, and Christophe, I think, said it very clearly in the EPR presentation, you have to think about product design and what is really the product you are focusing on. And I really speak as a manufacturer. Okay, before starting to manufacture, let's really think about what do we design, what do we sell. What are the needs of the consumers, okay, and how to optimize the full end-to-end approach. So I will provide example on the PET water bottling industry. So next, please. So this slide, what is a factory and how do we operate factories? And it's factories, I will start with in the EPR perspective. First, it's about people. And people, it's about behavior, it's about norms, and this is very key. EPR, it's about people all over the chain, including in the factories. Then it's about standards. Standards are also critical, and you have internal standards in the factory, and you can have also external standards. And it's very important to work and to identify and to be clear about what are the standards you are considering. And then another key practice, which is key to enable circular economy and factories to develop in circular economy, it is modules. In fact, I will call this modular engineering is making a key difference, because you really have to focus on how the physical flow and then the data flow are synchronized together. And then to make it workable, you really have to ensure clarity per modules, and how do you break down the flow and which are the modules you consider. And I will say the more granularity and the more clarity you have on your modules, and the more efficient you are. Then the third point, it's really about checklist. Checklist, it's really about alignment, it's about discipline in execution, and to enforce EPR, discipline in execution is very key. And then from a practical standpoint, checklists are making a key difference. And last but not least, it is about regulations and laws. It's very important to consider local regulation and laws, and then this regulation and laws, they must, I will say, support the producer and the manufacturer to enforce EPR legislation. Okay, so then experience can be very key because it's really a transition from, I will say, one set of laws to another set to really get the right frame of laws and regulation to operate the factories and to ensure that the EPR cycle is really taking shape. Next, please. So you understand also that from a producer standpoint, cost and investment are very key. So here I provide an example of a transformation of a factory, which is driven by circular economy. And you see on this picture an existing factory which is extended, and the extension is related to transformation and circular economy, I will say development, is generating needs for investment. And this is a key topic. How do we ensure sustainable investment in the factories? So this point, and for a producer, the question of finance and the question of investment in the EPR context is very critical. Next, please. So the circular economy is becoming a reality, and the factories, and then there is a question of do we deal with new factories and we start from scratch, or do we have legacy factories? Okay, and if we have existing factories, legacy factories, which have been designed to use virgin material, I would say external resources, then they have to be transformed to use recycled materials. Okay, and then when circular economy is becoming a reality, then next, please, Aurora. You have to be very clear about the local business models you consider, and you have to clarify what are your flows, end-to-end flows. So what is the product you consider? How is the product design? How do you procure the materials locally? Okay, what is the sourcing of the material? Then the factory, what kind of volumes, what kind of practices are you willing to develop and to promote? And this is triggered also by a lot of logistic thinking and logistic design, the road to market, to deliver the forecasted sales, okay, to get the product in use. So the question of the product in use then is very critical about what product for which consumers, okay, and how sustainable is the product in use. And then one of the answers to this question is about end-of-life disposal. If the end-of-life disposal is enabling reverse logistics, and then we can really close the loop, then we know now that we have a sustainable end-to-end closed loop in action. If it's not the case, then we know that the product in use is not the one we need for the future, and so we really have to rethink the whole loop and the whole cycle to make a transition and to trigger changes. Next, please. Based on it's really coming from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. There are 3 principles of this new ways to operate factories. And I will be specific for water bottles and plastic water bottles. So it's clear that the path for the future is reusable bottles and packaging. With that's really the first aim of water bottling, and this is the long-term direction. Then, in any case, we have the use of recycled materials. That's another key direction that is really becoming a reality. We have the point of lightweighting bottles and packaging, and then we operate factories through lean manufacturing. It's also about energy consumption to be reduced at minimum, and then we have to shorten distribution channels. And all these actions, which are very practical action, and in the design thinking and in the transformation of the factories, is to design out waste and pollution. That's really very critical. Then the second principle about key products and materials in use, it's really about collection. And this is, as you understand the loop, it is how to close the loop, and the packaging and the secondary packaging and the tertiary packaging. We must find the best and the most effective way locally to collect the PET bottles, to use and reuse or recycle the PET bottles, okay, and then all the packaging material as well must be reused and recycled. So this is really a big change happening, and in the PET water bottle industry, we are convinced that we can develop a practice where we can really fully close the loop. And then we have, and when it's about water, it's really also very critical. We have to ensure that the water conservation and the water efficiency are really realities. Okay, and then this is another point. It's why the question of water in bottles is very critical and then about consumer use. What are the alternatives? What are the choices? What is the context of use? And all these questions are very critical to ensure good water for the people needing the needs of water every day. Next, please, Aurora. As Christophe put the stress on, the measures are very key, and we need to share measures. Okay, and so to share measure, we need to collect data, and to collect data, we need to have very clear also definition and standard about data. Okay, and this is for the producer. It's also a very critical area where a lot of work is going on. What are the data that are needed, and how do we share them in practice? Okay, and with digital, for sure, we have new opportunities to provide the right data that we need to make EPR alive. Next, please. And all these changes which have been starting some decades ago and which are now becoming reality in some, and I would say advanced reality in some countries, for sure it is based on a joint effort, no doubt. And then as an example, there are now toolboxes which are shared and which really help producer to really move step by step to continuously improve their practice of EPR. Next, please. I want to share two cases quickly. One is about France. The PRO in France, it's not a competition, it's one for the French market. It is called the CTO. And they are communicating CTO on 61% of recycling percentage for plastic bottles and plastic packaging. Okay, so this is a public on their website, and this is reflecting an effort of more than 30 years of EPR development in France on EPR for plastic bottles. Next, please. I want also to share, just to provide a thought and to share ideas, okay, and it's about Switzerland, okay. In Switzerland, there is also one PRO with different way to implement it. It is called the PET Recycling Schweiz, okay, and these are some figures communicated by this PRO in Switzerland, and they are in the range of 85%. Okay, so you see a gap in terms of figures and results and between Switzerland and France, and it's interesting to understand the differences between the two practices and why on one side we are, I will say, advanced, and on the other side we are very advanced. Okay. And there are a lot of lessons to be learned, I think, if we do a deep analysis of the two practices of EPR in two different countries. Next, please. So then I told you that I'm convinced that scientific knowledge is really required, and we have to foster, and Christophe mentioned research and development, okay, so to reach the zero leakage into the environment, okay, and this, in my view, can be done locally and must be done locally also in each market, okay, because the local practice is very key. So the way I'm contributing to this on my side, please next, Aurora, is I have joined a university in Paris called the Dauphine University, part of the university in Paris, and I am really doing a research program which I started it 1 year ago, and I have another 2 years of research and development to be able to communicate on my first results. And the key point is really how to contribute and to help to make waste a valuable resource, and waste for plastic bottles for water as well. So thank you for inviting me, and very happy to join this panel and this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Marc, very much for this presentation. I was very intrigued as I saw your slides about your study project. Now I know. Thanks for sharing. So we have now seen how EPR can be seen from a PRO perspective, from a producer perspective. There's a lot still more to discuss, also from a technical point of view, which is why I would then like to begin a panel discussion between our 3 speakers for today's slot, Mr. Christophe Pautrat, Mr. Sebastian Frisch, and Mr. Marc Bouillon, of course. As a short comment, Mr. Sebastian Frisch is part of the BlackForest Solutions Group in Berlin, in Germany, which is a consultancy specialized in waste management, hazardous and non-hazardous waste, and the associated solutions. So welcome to the panel discussion of 3 speakers. We may now begin. So I will begin with Christophe. You mentioned that there are key success factors in your presentation, and 2 caught my eye. The first is how does one ensure a fair playing field? Then you said this was important, so that there is no extra benefit or unfair conditions. So Could you expand on this? How can this level playing field be achieved within EPR?
Yeah, sure. I mean, at the core of this level playing field is when you set clear target, clear role and responsibilities for the various participants, and that you measure and control. What we see, I mean, I can give you an example. I mean, some years ago, we were approached by a consortium of battery manufacturer in the US, and they wanted to implement a voluntary EPR approach. And this went on, and the study was conducted, and then one of the participants in the consortium decided to withdraw for any reason, and then another one, based on the first withdrawal, decided to withdraw, and the remaining one decided to call it quit and not do the project, because they said, okay, then otherwise, if we do this voluntary system, a few of us will be paying for the entire efforts, and the other companies who have withdrawn will just be happily free riding and surfing on the benefits without facing any of the costs. And therefore, this system didn't work. So what does it say? It says that sometimes if you want a clear impact across the entire society, the regulatory approach works better because you can mandate all to participate. And then after that, to ensure this level playing field is to have clear rules, written, enforce, control, and of course, a penalty regime for those who don't contribute to the system.
Yes, indeed. Good ways to approach such a risk. Jean-Marc, there are for sure several risks from a producer's perspective then in joining or starting an EPR system. Could you mention some?
Yes, Aurora, perhaps you can change the slide and go to the next one. Just it will help me to answer. The last one, if you agree. Yes, the last. Yes, or this one. Yes, but the last one will help me. The one before. Okay. So the risk for the producer, in fact, I will say for me it's related to I will say the business models. Okay, that the producer is operating, and then if the EPR system is not properly enforced and is not fair, okay, one of the first risks is really about the sustainability of the model and then the investment done. Okay, so EPR can help to invest and make sustainable investment. Okay, and it can also, I will say, if a lack of EPR, or if it's not the right EPR, if it's not really a fair EPR, then it could slow down the willingness to invest. Okay, I think this is a very key point to think about. It's really how the relationship between EPR and business development and investment for today and the future. Okay. That's and then once this is clarified, the other point is I will say the cost of operation, the allocation of the cost, it must be sustainable for the producer. Okay, so this is why I'm really with Christophe. Clear rules are very key and clear, and I will say the way from the transition is managed from I will say former models to new models must be clearly agreed between the stakeholders.
Agreed. Mr. Frisch, from your perspective then, moving away from risks and going on opportunities, what do you think the impact is of an EPR system on waste recyclers and managers? Is it good? Is it bad?
Yeah, I think that this has a major impact on the waste management market. So when you look at the German market, for example, it was one of the key milestones, the implementation of EPR. I would say maybe the most important, besides the ban of untreated waste to landfill, to have this extended producer responsibility implemented in Germany in the beginning of the 90s already, because it really goes to the root of the problem. So it's not like that. For example, if you think cleaning streets or cleaning beaches, or also marine litter, this is a situation where the waste has already polluted the environment. But EPR actually starts at the root cause, which is the polluter pays principle. And actually it is one of the key financial measures to get funding for all the waste management. So on the first day, I think we have seen that when we talked about the German market, that only through the EPR system in Germany it was possible to fund 1.2 billion euros in the topic, or in the fund for packaging waste recycling. So the impact is so strong, because it is the chance to allocate appropriate funding for all the activities, and it's also a chance for many Asian countries, including Cambodia in our point of view, because the whole principle of polluter pays can be applied to any market worldwide. And this is the chance for the Cambodian government and the Cambodian stakeholders to allocate sufficient funding for the waste management system. So very big and very positive impact through EPR, in my point of view.
Thank you for thank you for that panorama. As you mentioned, funding and financial aspects. I would like to ask Mr. Pautrat, what is then the cost of EPR? How does it look like for involved parties? Sorry, you're on mute.
Yeah, there is noise outside, so I was muting myself. So yes, the cost of EPR, well, first it depends. I mean, I cannot tell you how much it costs. I can tell you what are the components and the cost drivers in EPR. Because it depends on the material, the products, it depends on the targets, it depends on the goals that you want to achieve. But let's say that to create an EPR environment where you give to producers. Let's talk about packaging, for instance, that they need to collect a certain percentage of the packaging placed on the market and achieve certain recycling quotas out of the waste collected. Then the cost would be operational cost, mostly. That is the cost of collecting, the cost of sorting, the cost of treatment. This cost would be reduced through the marketing of the valuable fraction out of the treatment process. And then on top of that, you have costs that are necessary for the EPR system to be successful. A key area which is critical in the beginning, but never stops, is education and information of the consumers, of the various participants in the EPR, so that people do the right thing in terms of, for instance, separating the packaging from the rest of the waste, or bringing the packaging to a bring point, a sorting station, or hand it over to those who are involved in the packaging waste collection. And so education and information is a very significant cost to be factored in. And then after that, you have the cost of every organization. That is, you need offices, you need people. As you've seen from my presentation, you need software, you need information management systems, and all of that are combined into a cost which in absolute value can appear sometimes high, but which expressed in terms of cost per inhabitant per year is usually negligible. And let's not forget that this cost is usually borne by the producers and included in their cost of goods sold, same as R&D or manufacturing or distribution.
Thank you. Now that you mention R&D, from Mr. Jean-Marc's presentation, I think you mentioned design for the environment, lean production, thinner bottles. So on that line, what are then the incentives behind designing for environment? Is it financial especially? What else could play a role?
In fact, for producers, first, I mean packaging, and it is really for me the first key discussion. What is the value of packaging? And packaging makes sense when it is essential to safely and efficiently meet the needs of the consumer. For example, in some case, you know, whatever the material of the bottle, in some case it is really a must to have a bottle. You know, in some case it's not. So the needs of the consumer is really triggering I will say the design of the product and the needs for packaging. And then there is a wide variety of needs. So there is a wide variety of products and packaging. You know, today this is and there is now a very strong consensus that there is no place for this packaging in the environment. There is no doubt. So we should find a way to have a zero leak of packaging. Okay. So then the question, and depending the product. Okay, I see a question in the comments about recyclable plastic packaging. There are different research ongoing and different implementation about the kind of plastic, the way to recycle plastic and to reuse plastic. Okay, and then for sure, a question is when and where do we need plastic bottles for which products? Okay, that's really it's why it's about from a producer standpoint, we need a kind of producer model to work on with all stakeholders. If there is a local consensus that we need bottles, then we can provide bottles. Okay. If the consensus is we don't need bottles because we have other ways to drink water, okay, then this is part of I will say a joint effort between the stakeholders. That's really where the situation is nowadays. Okay, and we think. Okay, when I say we, I am part of. In some case, water of bottles are very needed, but not always. Okay, so this is and then this is about the consumer needs and to discuss about design for environment, because environment, it is also about the context of use and the context of consumption. When you have an EPR system in place, then the way you consume and the way you recycle is completely different, and then you can really optimize your design in the environment you consider, in the context you consider. So then you can, when you use bottles, you can choose the right material. You can lightweight the bottle as much as possible. You can reduce the energy to manufacture and fill the bottle. Okay, all this is part of the design for environment, and EPR is really it has really a huge potential to stimulate. I would call this low waste innovation. Okay, that's really something which is now triggering a product design and product innovation for sure.
Thank you. Mr. Frisch, you wanted to add on this?
No, thank you. I think it's well said from Jean-Marc. Nothing to add from this.
Okay. Well, in this same line, I've been observing the questions in the chat, and we'll integrate them in the discussion. It is a very well taken point, Jean-Marc, what you mentioned. There is an interesting question from Fatima. Thank you very much for this. It's regarding circularity. So in the circular economy, we observe resources, and we want to preserve them as much as possible. This also involves energy and water, as mentioned in her comment. So is there a possibility that EPR would stimulate moving beyond producing waste at all? So stop designing for recycling, but just create a system where there is zero waste, so to speak.
Yeah, I could answer on this. So I think this is already happening. So it's not something that can be discussed for the future. I think this is a situation where we are in already at the moment. And we have also reached a point, I think, that where there's no return anymore. So all the large consumer companies and multinational brands, they have no way back, so to say. So they are so much in the focus now, and they have also given themselves own targets that they cannot revise anymore. And I think everybody wants to go in this direction, and you see this more and more when you compare the situation now, 2020, with even 5 years ago. It's a completely different situation. So it's not what you may call maybe a couple of years ago just as greenwashing. Now there's a serious approach behind. There is a legal enforcement behind, and a very strong seriousness also from the consumer producers and from the brands side. So and Fatima asked here, I think, if this radical change would be possible, and it is already happening. I think we are in a situation where this radical change is happening now, and EPR is the driving force behind. And maybe also to answer on one question from Ms. Katrin Eitel, where she asked about how to implement the informal sector. And even here, I think EPR has the potential to specifically implement the informal sector, because EPR, what I said in the beginning, is first of all also creating a large fund. So there is money available for the waste management companies, for the operators of treatment facilities, and all these facilities needs jobs. So it's also a big job creation machine. And the informal sector can gradually move from being informal into a formalized work situation when they are being employed by the new companies that can arise along the EPR solution chain. Another aspect for the informal sector is also the digitalization. So when we speak about registration, about packaging waste, also aspects like plastic waste offsetting certificates. This is something that can also be driven by EPR. And especially with these certificates, it's possible to include the before informal sector into a formalized process. So especially this interface between EPR and digitalization is a unique chance to finally include the informal sector, because we cannot go into any waste management solution, especially in Asia, without including the informal sector. So I think it's definitely possible. And through EPR and digitalization, and we will hear tomorrow in the session 5, I think, one presentation from a company that speaks specifically on the informal sector and how this can work for Cambodia.
I would like to complement on first of all on the circularity bit, and maybe also on the informal sector. So regarding the circularity, how in practice, we can avoid, going to waste if possible. There are some practical steps that we can see in Europe. I mean, for instance, the single-use plastic directive, which aims at banning some one-way use. So first of all, we don't design such, single-use plastics anymore, remove them from the market altogether. So that is one way. Another way, and that we see, is when you provide an incentive through maybe reduced fees, if you can guarantee that the product you place on the market has more an enhanced lifespan. For instance, offering lower fees to producers who can guarantee availability of spare parts for their product over a certain period of time, or offering a certain guarantee beyond the minimum legal guarantees that they have to offer on most markets. So there are practical steps which are not necessarily completely changing the paradigm of designing, producing, and then collecting, but that makes this collection not less frequent, much less frequent, and therefore prolonging the life of the product. On the informal sector, I would also like to add a little something, is that if you don't include the informal sector, when you build your EPR system, then you have the informal sector against you. And the informal sector is usually making their living out of their activities. They do not collect waste because it's a fun activity. They collect waste because they make their life out of it. And while in countries like in Europe, you can somehow control the role and the influence of the informal sector, who sometimes collect via theft by breaking into the collection depots, etc. In most countries in the world, the informal sector is something to be considered as either a great contributor to EPR or as an obstacle. And I'd say it's better to consider it as a contributor to EPR. They have already a reverse chain in place. They already collect waste. So how, when we build EPR, can we leverage that? And the only issue that we can see with informal sector is that because they are individual entrepreneurs or groups or families or tribes, they only make revenue out of the trading of what they collect. They have to be very selective on what they collect. They have to cherry pick. Mm-hmm. So they only collect what gives them money. They will collect PET bottle, but they will leave flexible plastic on the ground. And this is where also EPR can play an important role, because as was highlighted by Sebastian, there is some money that is collected to build EPR, and EPR systems can compensate the lack of revenue arising, for instance, from the collection of multi-layer plastics, and say, okay, you're making more money with PET, we're going to subsidize the collection of MLPs, and then you are going to make as much or more money per hour by collecting MLPs than you will do by collecting PET. And then you have an existing skilled for this type of activity network of suppliers that you can use and that you can further integrate, maybe not always to the state where they're going to be included into the formal economy, but somewhat formalized, be it through education, training, sharing certain processes with them that you want them to enforce, ensuring traceability and measure of the waste collected through systems and apps like Sebastian described. And really, informal sector is a force to be considered, and it can be a great contributor. And if we speak about Cambodia, I mean, I don't know Cambodia, but from looking at other countries in the region, I dare say that certainly the informal sector has a great role to play in this country.
Thank you, Christophe. On that line, and stressing the important role that the informal sector can play, we can think about other players or other stakeholders. We have an interesting question from an anonymous user. How can development partners or NGOs advocate for or facilitate the implementation of EPR? To all speakers, any experiences with this?
Yes, maybe I can just give a very fresh example, and it's not yet actually, I mean, started because of the sanitary situation, but I mean, it's an NGO that has been around for many years and has been active in waste management. It's in Egypt, in the Hurghada area, so close to the Red Sea. There is an NGO who started out by cleaning the Red Sea, I mean, removing marine litter from the Red Sea, and they developed so much skills by doing so that eventually they received a commission from the local government to actually take charge of dry waste collection and management. So that is quite an extreme example of where NGO can be involved, but that gives some idea that they can have sometimes a very practical and hands-on role. At the moment, if you live in this region, your waste is being collected by this NGO under commission from the government, and we expect to be starting very soon a waste collection pilot for packaging, EPR implementation in Egypt, using this NGO as a project partner for this. And it's a GIZ mission in this country. More generally, NGOs, they have a role in let's say motivating the producers and the other stakeholders to be ambitious. And they have a clear, I'm talking about environmental NGOs or social NGOs, usually they voice a public expectation in terms of ambition when it comes to environment. They can also have a great role in terms of education, education of the public to segregate waste properly, but also education maybe of the waste pickers.
Sorry, my mouse was out of control for a second. Thank you for your contribution. We have lots of actually very, very good questions. Thank you to the participants for their active role.
And yes to Fatima, to the question she just asked.
Yes, the yes or no question. Yes, okay. There's one above from Ms. Claire. What's the risk that waste pollution could shift from states or regions where EPR is implemented to those where it is not?
There is a risk, certainly, and waste is like water, right? It always goes the easiest way. So when there's any chance to escape, then the waste will also escape from the system. That's why what Christophe said, it's extremely important to have a very good registration of all the packaging manufacturers and producers, so that we have an exact overview about what quantities of waste are in the market and of what qualities, so what type of waste. So, but this goes only through a very strict software system and a very strict implementation of the registration. And also tracking and monitoring plays a role. So that's another digital aspect that would need to be implemented. But with having this in place, my personal opinion is that I would be optimistic that it stays within the country, but we cannot deny that this risk is also there, so that waste is escaped from or is escaping from the official system and is leaking to even other states, regions. That's one risk that is definitely there.
It could, however, perhaps be compensated by offsetting, by plastic offsetting.
Yeah, this would be. Yeah, this would be one answer to the next question from Ms. Katrin Eitel. Also, she said, "I'm still struggling how this funding and later the use of the mentioned registry system should work for the informal sector." So there is one also quite recent development, I would say, you know maybe the CO2 offsetting certificates. So when people have the feeling they, for example, fly too much, or also whole companies, they have or whole governments or states, their CO2 footprint is too high, then there's either a voluntary possibility to compensate the CO2 footprint, or it is obligatory or mandatory to compensate the CO2 footprint. And now the same exists also for plastic waste. So there is now the possibility to offset the individual or also the company's level plastic waste footprint by investing into certificates. And this is also happening, for example, for multi-layer packaging, so or multi-layer plastics that can normally not being recycled. So the informal sector, or the Zabalin in Egypt, we are also working together with Landbell in Egypt, so we are aware about the Zabalin. So they are targeting at the moment more the recyclables, like the PET bottles, or maybe HDPE or PP, so the rather easy items. But what they cannot take at the moment would be the multi-layer packaging or the multi-layer plastics. And through this offsetting certificate that I mentioned before, it's possible to raise funds for this completely new stream. So it could be even a new income source for the informal sector. And the connection, the interface between the certificate and the informal sector is an app. So this is a digital solution. And here you're saying, yes, so when there's no internet, or the lack of writing or reading abilities, this can be a challenge, definitely. But the informal sector can be integrated into the digital system, where it might be even possible without being able to read or write, to participate in the system. And I could really recommend the session 5 tomorrow, where we see a practical example of one service provider. And they're actually doing this already in India, for example, or in Brazil. But this new plastic waste offsetting certificates is another funding possibility, and a possibility to explore new waste streams also for the informal sector. For example, the multi-layer packaging, the original problem, right? It's not so much the problem of recyclable plastics, it's more the problem of the plastic that we cannot recycle. And this can be combined even with this application and the offsetting certificates.
Yeah, the Zabalin is an interesting example, because they're the informal sector, but actually they're quite formally organized within the Zabalin community. And it's very hierarchical, and you have pickers, and you have your middle management and higher management. And effectively, there was the issue that they sort of controlled what they collect in order to keep the prices up. And that led to the quite undesirable situation where PET recycling in Egypt, where there is some capacity built there for PET recycling, had to import waste, and still has to import waste from outside of Egypt in order to feed their facility, because they cannot access all the waste available theoretically in Egypt, because there is some output control. And one of the steps that was being implemented was to actually work with some of the let's say traders operating the Zabalin community, some of them willing to invest into better processes, into better sorting equipment, in order to guarantee not only a higher output of plastic, but also a better quality. And the idea being, if you work with some of those, then there would be a domino effect that will lead the other ones. They will see that overall there is a bigger business opportunity, because the ultimate motivation was income and revenue. But the situation at the moment in Egypt still is that they have to import some of the plastic from Spain and other countries to feed their facility.
Thank you. I hope all these comments have answered the questions from attendees. Thank you. They were very good questions. If nobody has any more questions and the panelists don't have anything to add, I can only encourage you, or I hope you had taken note of the contact information of our speakers and of the organizers. Please feel free to get in touch and continue this very interesting discussion. I'd like to thank again, before we wrap up, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and their team, and the Global Business Network and the GIZ. Of course, to our panelists, thank you very, very much. This has been very interesting. Thank you all for participating, and our attendees, of course. We can now close and hopefully see you soon in the next session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.